Hey everybody, this is Geronimo from the Beyond Taboo podcast from Jolt to Grow, and I'm here with Conrad Rodriguez, our guest today, an important figure on the penal training field, and well, we're very excited to have you, Conrad. Hello, how's everything going, brother?
Everything's chilling, man. Chilling. Just excited to do this podcast, enjoying this and just trying to get as much of the good vibes out there and just kind of put out some good information when it comes to, training for PE in the best and most simple way possible. Because sometimes I feel like people overcomplicate things, and that's kind of what I want to just get into today is just how to make it reach your goals in the easiest way possible.
Well, it sounds great. Well, a part of our audience or listeners is already aware of your podcast, but if there's anyone that doesn't know, well, Conrad is the host and creator of the Masculine Health Solutions podcast. He has invited lots of very important people. So guys, don't forget to check out his podcast because it's full of value, and hopefully we can mention and share some of this value Conrad has gained throughout so much years of PE experience and physical training experience in general, in a sense.
Yeah.
So maybe we can start with a couple of questions. Well, I think a good question to start could be, well, how did you start with PE? What made you look into that area? Was there any particular, and I know this is something you have shared in some of your episodes, but just for our listeners that don't know you, to get to know you better, in a sense.
Well, I mean, I'm the same as a lot of other guys. I started off with a little bit of spite, a little bit of ego, combine these things together. And I kind of found that, well, if I take this anger and take this energy and kind of, put it into something positive like I have for other aspects of my life, I can probably reach the goals that I have. So, with that being said, yeah, sure, there were some disparaging comments that might have been made. And because of that, it got me started down the road of PE, and I started looking into like the whole extenders and Vimax and all that, right? Probably the first to tell you right now, Vimax pills are trash. And the majority of the supplements that you see in regards to like the actual pills that do anything are going to be garbage, right? So if anything that you see is like the horse Dick 5000, any of that is pure trash. Like it probably does not work. It might have a little bit of L-citrulline or something, but honestly, it's just going to increase your blood flow. So anyways, I wasted like $500 on it, and it's absolute garbage. However, the one thing that I did take away that was beneficial was the extender, right? And I started using it. I started to see gains, and I was like, yo, this is interesting.
Like a standard extender or an
just
all-day
like
stretcher?
Yeah, like an old school extender, right? Like old school 2 rods, right? Just old school. And it was so bad that I had to rig it myself, and I was using a rope that was causing all kinds of pain. But I was seeing gains, right? So I was like, no pain, no gains. Same thing as the gym mindset, so to speak. But it was, it gave me the initial gains. It gave me the initial start to actually start to uncover more of what PE kind of was. And that's where I started to discover like the biohacker.com. I started to discover Big Al, all the stuff that he talked about. But the one thing that totally changed the game for me was JP's 90-day program, which is something I talked about for a long time, and I will continue discussing because that's kind of where I saw the most gains being made. When it came to like the gains initially, it's like, yeah, I started off at 6.9. Now I'm like hovering between 8.7 to 8.9. In the cylinder, though, I did max out at 9.25. And then I gave myself a massive blister. So then I was like, okay, I don't want to do any more of like the stretch pumping. However, that's kind of, where I ended up. And now as far as maintenance goes, I'm just maintaining 8.7. I'm pretty happy there, right? In the cylinder, 2-inch, that's kind of what I'm doing right now. But at the time when I started JP's 90-day program, I hadn't really cracked like the 7.5, 8-inch mark. I think after using the extender, I had got to like 7.5, right? And then when I used JP's 90-day program, that took me to about 8. And JP's 90-day program, very simple. It was stretching, jelqing, and then I'd throw in some edging for conditioning and stamina work post-workout. And that's where I started to discover like a lot of the forms.
It was mainly manual, the program.
Oh, yeah, dude. Initially, it was just like the only thing you need nowadays is a little bit of that, that gel to grow gel. All you need is that balm nowadays.
Yeah, you're right.
Heal.
You're right.
That's all you need now. If you do want to get started from like a manual only perspective, that's kind of what I think is super beneficial. And I just did I recorded an episode on stretching because I still think it's necessary. I still think it's beneficial, and I still do it, right? But that being said, so I got into JP's 90-day program specifically for that reason. More than anything to make gains, use the manuals because I'm like, well, I don't really want to invest too much money, and I just threw
Hmm,
$500 down the drain, right? So I was like,
hmm,
yeah, I'll try this out. But then I saw gains again, and I'm like, okay, cool. What else can I learn on these forums, right? So again, it was mattersofsize.com.
hmm.
What's the other one? Thunder's
On display.
Place. Yeah, Thunder's Place was a big one.
Hmm,
And I kind of just, was all about discovery. And even now, I'm agnostic in my approach. I do not think there is a one size fits all. Like, I will never say that about anything when it comes to this life. Like, because to be one track minded in what I feel is almost like a martial art. Like,
hmm,
you know what? There's a lot of different ways to get the job done, and that's kind of why I kept just trying to discover as much as possible.
hmm,
And eventually, so I got into like clamping. Right, and that was more for girth, and that was more like my wife was more happy about the girth gains. I was like, wait, what am I doing here? Like, well, I'm focusing on length, and like nobody cares, right? So that took me down another rabbit hole where I learned more about like how the vagina works, sensitivity, and why girth is more important than length, for the female, right? For guys, it's kind of more an egoic thing. It's just like my
hmm.
dick's longer than yours, but then for the female, it's just more like, that one's fatter. It's kind of like the mushroom tip is bigger. So it's it changed my goals a little bit more because I was like, wait a minute, so I made these length gains, and at this time I was probably already about like 8 point something, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, so this isn't as important, which kind of changed the trajectory of the way that I was training. Because then I kind of like, okay, well, if I want more girth, what's something that's better for girth? And
Hmm.
that's where I got into pumping, right?
Oh, okay.
And that's probably like what 4 years ago, 5 years ago, where I got into pumping, and I started all wrong. It's like
Well, it can
I
happen.
yeah, man. Like the first thing I did was I got a 2.25-inch cylinder, right, which was like way too big. I should start off with the two. Even with the two, like the max expansion that I get to this day right now is about 6.7. So it's like, that's a little bit more or about half an inch more than where I'm currently at, right? Even though right now I'm doing more of a maintenance routine, it's still super beneficial because it helps you to pack the cylinder a lot faster. And what I find is that girth kind of carries over for the next couple of days too. And obviously, if I could train the way that I would like to, I know I'd be able to cement those gains in the way that I would like to. But
Hmm,
now I got different things going on. However, it's still great for maintenance, and it's still great because I'm using the appropriate size, right? Because like
hmm,
initially, what I did, I just thought it was all about packing the cylinder, so I would just spend
hmm.
hours and hours and hours inside of it, which is
Oh,
not the right
wow.
way to go about it, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, yeah, it can happen. The sizing, it's definitely important and something most people neglect. So yeah, I mean, it can pave your way into, well, not just the sizing, but well, starting with the wrong feet, it can certainly pave your way into a whole lot of injuries. So
Yeah, man. And I've had a couple, right? Luckily, no, nothing too intense, but so that was my I guess initiation into pumping, right? So again, the cylinder was too big. And then I was so much of a dumbass that I'm like, well, I'm already packing this 2.25-inch cylinder, so I should obviously get the 2.5, right?
bring me more.
Yeah. So that was my initial train of thought. And I'm like, and that's kind of where I discovered like the donut and how it looks very unesthetic. Like it looks so like it looked like a microwave salami, man. Like it looks so awful. So I was kind of like, okay, this is not what I'm going for, man. This doesn't look good, right? So that's kind of where I started to scale it back. And I said, you know what, I'll get the 2.1, and then I got the 2-inch cylinder. And I'm like, wait a minute, what am I doing here? So now I just kind of switch between the 2 and the 2.1. And in order for me to avoid the donut, now what I do is like I'll wrap under the glands to ensure that I don't get the donut, right? Like for me, the donut's like I
Band
don't want that.
with some bandage, or do you
Yeah,
use?
yeah, just yeah, like a 3M waterproof band-aid. You just use that. If I know I'm gonna have like a session where I can go for like a little bit longer, then I will use that, and it's way more effective, right?
Hmm.
The other thing that I would recommend too that I've seen like on mattersofsize.com, is kind of like a silicone sleeve, and you can use different
Yeah,
ones that are a little bit tighter around, right? So
and you
it
can
keeps
cut
you.
them, right? Like in the
Yes,
hmm,
yes. I
hmm.
got some from totalmanshop.com as well, but they were too thick. So I found that I didn't really like it because it was too constrictive. However,
Okay,
I mean,
good
for
to
me,
know.
my favorite is still like, just go with the Band-Aid. It's cheap, it's easy. You run out, you buy some more for $5. No big deal, right?
That's
And the
true.
thing is, it's kind of like, it just helps to keep that donut away. Cause like I said before, that donut is ugly, not into it.
Hmm.
And then, I guess when I was already starting the podcast around 2022, 2023, I started talking to Robert from phanger.com or p-hanger, p-hanger.de, and he talked about how he made 2 inches of length gain, and girth actually from just hanging. And he actually hooked me up with one of his hangers, more like a clamp style hanger. He
Okay.
kind of looks like the bib hanger, right? And he learned all that he knows from bib. And again, that's kind of why my philosophy when it comes to PE is like, yo, nobody knows everything and we can all learn from each other. And he taught me how to use that. So I started using it a little bit, but I found that for me I didn't have the time for it, right? However, I
Mm,
will say that nothing gave me the stretch as far as the suspensory ligaments concerned than hanging.
mm,
Like hanging by far for
mm,
me, it's kind of like if you are in a place right now where you're looking predominantly for like length gains, right? And you can afford it, I'd say, hey, get yourself a hanger, whether it's the one from gelictogain.com, mattersofsize.com,
Zen
or from
hanger.
Zen Hanger. Yeah, like there's so many different ways to go about it. Like hanging works effectively. However, the one thing that I did see that's like on my next to buy list is I believe it's called the Apex Extender, if I'm not mistaken. It's
Mm.
by a guy, oh shoot, I saw it online. But basically it's the newest one. It was I saw
It
Peak
does
Male
ring a
Physique.
bell.
Yeah, oh god. BD from Peak Male Physique and Dr. Hink were talking about it. And I think it's their friend that does it. It's called something novelties, exotic novelties, I think.
Okay.
Anyways, this new extender has about 30 pounds of force. And I was
Mm,
like, yo, if that's the case, then you don't even need a hanger anymore. Because I mean, to get 30 pounds hanging is really, well, not gonna say super uncomfortable, but difficult, right? Whereas if
mm,
you can just use an extender, man, like, and it's a lot more comfortable than the pieces of shit that I was using back in the day, right? It's kind of like now you got the Fallison Forte, you got the Penny Master, you got the Jout to Gain method. Like, there's so many different ways and so many different modalities that exist now that
mm,
I honestly feel like it's just getting more comfortable. And when it comes to PE, I honestly just think the more comfortable, the better, the more you'll get done. But that's
mm,
pretty much what,
mm.
my experience has been with PE so far in a nutshell, right?
Well, mate, you have certainly tried a lot of different methods. So I guess my next question could be, and I'm really intrigued. What would be sort of like the, I don't know, maybe four or five
Yeah.
or whatever you can come up with rules or better pieces of knowledge that completely transform your
Mm,
P journey?
that's a good question, man. I'd say number one, comfort is king. If it's not comfortable, you're not going to do it. And if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to do it, right? So it's kind of like it's a combination of comfort and enjoyment. You have to have
Mm,
these things in order to actually um I think succeed in PE, because if you don't have it, you're not going to make it. The second thing that I would say though is commitment, because when it comes to people that talk about getting shit done, like I got clients too that I train and just people in general all the time that ask me like, oh, I want to lose fat, I want to get in shape, I want to put on muscle. How do I do this? What did you do? And then I'll tell them the routine. They're like, oh, that's hard. I'm like, yeah, but I committed to it. Therefore, I'm going to
mm,
reach my goals.
mm,
And when it comes to a lot of people, you start to find out that they're just not committed to anything. So
mm,
I would ask the person who wants to get involved or do PE, it's like, how committed are you? Like, think about the thing that
yeah,
you're most committed to, and you need that level of commitment if you actually want to make the gains that you want to make, right?
yeah, that's true.
Because if you don't have the commitment to these disciplines, you're not going to succeed. So it's like, why
Mm.
bother? And like,
Yeah,
I'm
it
kind
does
of very
require
cut and
time.
dry. Yeah, like, dude, if you're not going to invest time, money, and energy, you're not going to succeed. And the thing is, too, it's like, you can't be cheap, I guess would be like another thing that I would say too for myself is like invest in the things that are actually of quality. Like when I go to the gym, I invest in good shoes. I have great headphones. Like I try to make it an enjoyable experience, and that's kind of the best transition that I would bring into PE. Like when it comes to PE, I want the best equipment that I can buy. Like for me, when I went out and got the bathmate, I thought it was the best piece of equipment that I could get, so I was willing to spend the $400. Oh yeah, and I tried the bathmate out too. Only I wasn't a fan of the bathmate. Unfortunately, I spent all that money and it wasn't comfortable. However, I don't really regret investing into something that I think will take my success to the next level. So another thing that I think is key is just like, yo, don't be cheap. Like
Mm,
invest in yourself. If you actually
mm,
want to take it to the next level, cool. However, I know there's people that's like, hey, I'm not in a position where I can actually, invest in myself financially. Then I'm like, okay, well, you got energy and you got time. All you need is some coconut oil, maybe some lube. Like you got different ways to go about it. So really there's no excuse, and that kind of goes full circle with those other things. I
mm.
guess the other
It
thing that I
makes
would say
sense.
too for number four is due diligence, man. Do your research. Because a lot of people get into this and have a whole bunch of different ideas that they think make sense, and they kind of hear something that they think is gonna work, and then they'll kind of try it out for a little bit. But if you haven't really done the research, you don't have a solid plan, you're not gonna go
Yeah,
anywhere, right? And that's
yeah,
kind of where I was in the first couple of years, right? It's kind of like you're trying everything, and even now looking back in retrospect, I could have probably just done 3 different modalities and had way more success. But the thing is, and that's the same trap that so many people fall into in so many different modalities when in life in general, it's just like you try everything and then you discover after you're all done, you're like, fuck, I could have just done like 3 different things and I would have made the gains that I wanted. And I wouldn't have wasted as much time. Right. Because
yeah,
the thing is, when you're starting off, there's a lot of experimenting, which I understand is
yeah.
necessary, which kind of follows into like my next one. And this is, I mean, it's the exact same thing as personal training. So I've been working out since I was probably like 12, 11, man. Right.
Oh,
And I've
wow.
been working out like hard, heavy, like I tried out everything. However, I mean, I didn't reach like my peak physical condition until like 2 years ago when I did my bodybuilding competition. Right.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's because the one thing that was always missing when it came to developing the best physique was that I didn't have my diet in check. So if my diet wasn't in check, I'll never have the best physique. Now, if
So,
I
so
just hired,
you saw good consequences in your P training when you changed your diet,
no, not so much.
or you're
Yeah,
talking
yeah, this
about.
is completely
Oh, okay.
different. So yeah, it's kind of like what I'm trying to get at here is kind of like if I had mastered my diet, right, when it came to my training, right, for bodybuilding, then I would have reached the best physique I would have ever had ever, like at 20, and I would have just
Yeah,
built way higher there, right? And the
yeah,
reason why I say that, like my fifth point, as far as like the top 5 things for PE, is that if I had gotten coaching at a younger age,
yeah,
I wouldn't have to experiment for like 10 years. I would
yeah.
have shaved all that time off,
Yeah, it
right?
can
So now when
save
it
a
comes
lot
to,
of time. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
oh, dude, 100%. Like if I just hired a PE coach, like say Big Al or these other guys that were around that existed back then, I mean, if I had hired a PE coach or done like an app or had some type of plan, the guidance, I would
Yeah.
have skipped so much bullshit along the way that I probably would have made my gains in probably like, I'd say half the time, probably like 5 years, right?
Maybe avoided some injuries also. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
not in your case, but maybe lots of guys get some real injuries because, well, in this experiment you do with your own self, I mean, things can get quite confusing when there's so much information that says, well, sometimes contradictory things, you know?
Yeah. And the thing is too, it's like you're just taking in so much information. Like my whole thing is just like I love the KISS principle. I mean, I'm pretty old now because I'm 36, right? So, at this age you start to realize how
That's not
stupid you are.
old.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's kind of like at this age you start to realize how much you don't know, right?
Yeah.
And you've been humbled enough by life to know that you're kind of a
Hmm.
moron, when it
Okay,
comes to
I
the
know.
grand scheme of things.
Okay, I get what you mean. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of like so that's kind of where I'm at now. It's almost like that rediscovery phase, but it's easier now because your ego's put to the side. Like it doesn't really matter anymore as
Hmm.
much. Like in my 20s when you're
Well,
earlier, you know
hopefully,
everything. Yeah.
hopefully.
Yeah. It's one of those things that I think in life, like around this time, a lot of men started to realize, like, okay, you know what? I can't do it all myself. I can't figure it out all myself. I'm gonna reach out for help. And that's kind of where
Hmm.
you're able to put the ego to the side. And that's kind of where the coaching comes in. And that's kind of where you see an acceleration. Cause now it's like, hey,
Hmm.
you know what? I'm just gonna go to somebody that's done it. Like, what should I do? And when you
Hmm.
put that, you have that mindset or that approach to it, it makes it so much easier, dude. Like so much easier. And that's I think in everything in life too, because I'm starting to discover this for pretty much every aspect of life. It's like why bother trying to figure it out yourself? So even with finances, why would I try to figure out every aspect of finances when I could just hire a financial coach? Like, okay, what do you recommend I do? How should I do
Well,
it?
that's a good
Okay, that
point.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
Well, now that you mentioned the whole ego chapter, if you will, well, ego in P, or well, maybe ego in penis size is definitely a huge personality, a
Yeah.
huge thing. But I guess my question could be, how did you manage? Because, well, I really think ego sometimes fuels a lot of P journeys for lots of men. I mean, for example, in PE groups, or let's say Telegram groups or WhatsApp groups, there's this constant sharing of images that sometimes fuels or motivates men by comparing themselves, you know? So, well, and I think there are lots of men that really picture or have these very ambitious goals, you know, like maybe trying to reach to your, I don't know, favorite porn star or whatever. So how did you personally manage your own ambitions, maybe the ambitions that were purely fueled by your ego, and how did you find like your balance? Maybe, well, you mentioned that you are now on a maintenance phase. Did you, for example, find out at some point that you were just fine with the gains you made and stopped for that reason? How was that precisely in your experience?
I found that the process initially, like, yeah, like I said, I was kind of fueled more by like the egoic side of things, which is kind of like, okay, I want to make these goals, I want to reach this, and then, I want to make sure you know, satisfied, like I'm good to go. But then, like I said, when I discovered the girth thing, I'm like, wait a minute, so I'm chasing length for no reason, so that kind of like, it hit me like a stack of bricks, right? I'm just like, wait, why am I, who cares? Because I was almost like, well, if that doesn't matter and this does, and I'm just going to focus on this. Plus, the other thing too is like at the time, on a lot of on the forums and stuff, it would just say 8x6 is like the golden number, right? It's kind of like a minimum, kind of like the
Yeah, I've read
standard.
that before. Yeah, it's true.
So in reading that too, I was like, well, I'm already there. So technically I'm like, and then I would also read those charts about like overall size, like the average size of the world and stuff. And I'm like, well, technically I'm all the way like over here. So this technically shouldn't be an issue for me, right? And I kind of
Hmm.
realized that when the average is kind of like 6 inches or whatever, I'm like, okay, well, I already surpassed that by quite a bit. Now, why am I doing this? Right. And that's kind of where now you face the question of like, why are you pursuing this? Right. And the reason why for me, I continue to work on it, even though right now I'm in a maintenance phase, but I do want to continue growing, is more than anything, I'm doing it for myself. Like, I could give a fuck about what people on the forums are going to say or what this guy's going to, like, whatever. Like, and at
Hmm.
this point, like I said, when you get to like a certain age too, it's almost like it's more about pursuing a dream or a goal that you have personally
Okay. Okay.
versus like what somebody's gonna say about you or the egoic side of things. Like, nah, I could give a flying fuck anymore. Like I
Yeah, that's true.
really, it does not bother me one bit. The thing is, and it's the same as bodybuilding as well. Ultimately, yes, you will be judged in the public arena, right? Because you're gonna go on stage, basically scantily clad. But at the end of the day, it's always, how did I do in comparison to last show? Did I get better? Did I do better? Was my conditioning better? Did I improve this? And it's the same for PE because ultimately it's just you and your own dick, right? Like it's nobody else around it. I mean, nobody else is really going to deal with it except for your significant other. So is she satisfied?
Hmm.
Does she like it? All right, good to go. Does it work? Is it aesthetic? Did it get bigger? Did it get bigger in a way that she likes? Then ultimately, if you basically are able, to take care of all those different things, then at the end of the day, like what somebody says, or I could give a shit.
It really
Like
doesn't matter. That's
it
true.
really doesn't matter. Like for me at this stage, just it's almost like those memes or whatever. It's just like me versus me. It's pretty much where I'm at now because it's kind of like I'm doing these goals for myself, right? And at
Hmm.
the end, like even at the onset too, because I'd see people bicker and fight, and it's kind of like religion. Like for me,
Hmm.
like I have my personal beliefs, right? And like I like Jesus and everything, right? Like that's that's my personal belief, I guess. But I will never, ever, 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 ever join a religion again. Why? Because
Hmm.
a religion is just a group of people and they like to fight other people. Well, nah, take that back. That sounds a little bit too harsh, but it's
That's
kind
true.
of like people get too charged up with a different
Yeah,
group of
yeah, yeah.
people that are all of the same mindset. And sometimes they'll clash. And I'm like, there's no need to clash. Let's just explore the different ideas. And
Hmm.
that's kind of my philosophy when it comes to PE or anything. Like a lot of people like to group together and they go after each other. I'm like, why? What is the
Yeah,
point?
that's true.
Right. So that's kind of why I'm like, take the ego out of it, take out your beliefs, like whether you're part of this crowd or that clique. It's kind of like, it's not needed in my opinion. That's kind of why, like I said, like
Yeah,
I'm
well,
agnostic.
it's interesting to see men defending their own methods with, for example, the size they've gained throughout time, or just just because there's people defending some method just out of being big, and
Yeah.
without even proving their actual gains. It's quite competitive. I mean, there's a whole like nice sort of brotherhood feeling in
Hmm.
many key forums, but there's also maybe this sort of darker side you get to see.
Yeah.
uh, but well, as time passes, everyone finds the best place to be. I mean, where you feel more comfortable with, and there are many groups out there. And like you just said, a big portion of your journey will be based in just you with your opinions and the research you do, and in the best case scenario, a coach to guide you to
Hmm.
the best way possible. So yeah, yeah,
No,
that's true, man.
and that's kind of like one thing that I found in the forums too. It's like some guys would fight with other guys that were like, "No, you shouldn't jelq at all," and I'm like, "Well, it worked for me," and that's kind of
Mm,
why I'm like, again, I'm agnostic, and if something worked for somebody, then why get rid of it completely? Like that's always
uh,
been my question. And if somebody says that, "Hey, I train in this way," and maybe it's higher volume, I'm like, "Whoa, that's kind of intense." Like I would even listen to some of the guys that hang, and they'd say like, "Hey, man, I like to hang for I'll go for at least 20 minutes with a minimum of 10 pounds." I'm like, "Holy shit!" Like that sounds excessive,
mm,
but it's working for the guy, right? And
mm,
and that's kind of where you do have to meet people from where like they're saying things, and I understand not everybody verifies it, but a great example of that is if you look at Bib never posted any pictures online, right? And but Bib created the hanger, and like to Robert's point, like he helped the man gain 2 inches. So do I need to get granular with what somebody else is doing or how they believe it or how they present it? Not necessarily. I will obviously try to just go
yeah,
with the information they give me, and then I'll experiment with it myself. Obviously, I'll do it in a way that's cautious because I'm not going to injure myself being an idiot either. Like if
for sure,
somebody tells me like, if you inject
for
it
sure.
and you have a hard on for 4 hours, you're gonna, like no, you got to use some common sense too, right? But the way I kind of see it is that if somebody presents something that makes sense and is worth giving a shot, then give it a shot. And you try it out. Did it work for you? No. Okay, then don't do it. Scrap it, right? Or did I give myself at least a month, 2 months of trying it out, and I saw some decent gains? I think I'm going to go deeper with that way of thinking, right? And
Yeah,
I think a lot of the animosity that comes on the forums and stuff from the guys that are bigger,
yeah,
or from the guys that are bigger that kind of post pictures, is usually it's like the smaller dude who's just kind of like, oh, this guy just posts because he just wants to show off, blah blah blah. Like
yeah,
I
that
saw that on
happens.
Reddit all the time too, where it's just like, well, I mean, maybe the man's just proud of his gains. Like, I don't know. I'll be on Reddit
Yeah.
too, looking at like fat loss transformations, and it's the same deal. Some people are just like, oh, this guy's on steroids, and it's like, well, no,
Well,
he's just
that's
a
very
true
interesting.
transformation. Yeah,
That's
it's
very
it's
interesting.
it's the same psyche of men across the board, across the different fields. It's the same deal with the
Mm,
guy that rolls up in a Lamborghini, always just showing off because he's got a small dick. We've all heard it, dude. Like, you know what I mean? So you can't really win, which is ultimately why I go back to my philosophy is if you're doing it, do it for you. If you're doing it for yourself and you're winning and you're happy, then fuck what anybody has to say, man. Like, you're winning. You're happy. Like, it's ultimately that's kind of what it comes down to for me. And that's kind of my philosophy when it comes to PE and just life in general, I guess at this point.
How would you define, in that sense, obsession in a PE journey?
Oh, dude. I think everybody gets hit with that eventually, including myself. Like, it got to a point where it's like all I was thinking about was like, okay, if I stretch for like X amount and I do this and I do that, and I think one of the biggest issues too is like measuring yourself after every freaking session. I did that. I
Mm.
was so guilty of that. Like I've done it before. Where it's like, okay, I see like, oh, is that half an inch? No, it's not. Okay, I got to try harder. I think a lot of people will get obsessive, but I don't think. I think obsessiveness sometimes is a requirement in commitment, right? So people will talk about people that are obsessed with something as almost like, oh, that's horrible. They're obsessed with X, Y, Z. But if you look at a guy like Kobe Bryant, he was always talked about as being obsessive. You look at a guy like Michael Jordan, same deal. You look at a guy like Jerry Rice in American football, same deal, right? These guys
Mm,
trained, they took care of their bodies. LeBron James, perfect example of that as well. He
mm,
invests $2 million just into his body, into recovery, food, nutrition, all that kind of stuff.
mm.
So my question is always like, how bad do you want it? If you want to
Okay.
succeed, you have to sacrifice something. If somebody labels you as obsessed, fuck it. Let them label you that way. But
Hmm.
if you come out winning and you're happy, ultimately, number one, you achieve what it is that you're after, and that's all that matters, right? Because
But do
that's the
you think
way.
could it be there, for example, do you think there's a harmful side of obsession? Maybe?
I think there could be a harmful side to anything. Because honestly, when it comes to obsession, it number one, it depends on how you look at it, and it depends on what the obsession, basically, what is it? Where is that obsession taking that person, right? Like if
Okay.
you're obsessed to the point where it's like you do nothing else but PE, like 23 hours a day, you don't even sleep, then I'm like, yeah, okay, that's beyond messed up, right? It's kind of like you're just sitting there joking for like 23 hours.
In a dark room, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of like the way I see it. It's almost like, I guess a good way to separate it's like a healthy obsession versus a negative obsession. Because when it
Mm,
starts to like, I don't know, you're
that's a
spending
good way
12
of
hours
thinking
a
it.
day on it, like that's kind of the way I look at it. It's like a healthy obsession is something that still contributes positively to your life. A negative one is something that starts taking away from it, is the way that I kind of see it.
Well, so in a sense, following your criteria or your perspective, I think, yeah,
Mhm.
a good thing could be for it's pretty subjective in a sense. Like
Yeah.
you need to see what you're losing, in a sense,
Hmm.
what you may be sacrificing.
Yeah. Because if it's almost, I don't know, I find that like people will look at me and be like, oh, you're obsessive with the way that you work out. But I'm like, am I? It's kind of like a necessity. I
Mm,
got to train for X amount of hours to reach the goal that I have. And that's the thing too. It's like when it comes to PE or anything else, other people might look at you as obsessive because you're spending 2 hours a day, which I don't think is that much. And maybe you're reading up on it, you know, and maybe you're passionate about what it is that you're doing. And other people will view you from that perspective, right? But unless somebody's
mm,
more successful than me in whatever it is that I'm trying to do, I honestly, like I could not care. Like it's almost like if they have not reached their goals, I'm not going to listen to them anymore. That's kind of
mm.
that's my personal philosophy, though.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. So, Conrad, yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned like the biggest pieces of knowledge you learned throughout your journey. And I was wondering maybe what piece of advice could you share to our listeners when it comes to, well, the biggest mistakes you've made, like your
Oh,
top three or four? You mentioned a couple. Uh,
yeah. I say top three mistakes is too much too soon, right? So make it gradual. Whenever you're starting anything in life, it's like you're not going to go into the gym and bench 4 plates. Most people are going to go in there and, bench 400 pounds. You got to start off with like maybe benching the bar in some cases, which is 45 pounds. It's the same deal with PE. If you're starting off, like you always try to reach for that low hanging fruit, which is something that I always talk about like in the podcast as well. It's you want to do 20 to 30 minutes starting off. It's a brand new stimulus to your dick. Why would you start off with like 2 hours right off the bat? Just
mm,
because you read about some guy on a forum that has an hour and a half workout doesn't mean that you should too, right? It's kind of
mm,
like if I train the same way that a bodybuilder that's on steroids trains, I will get hurt, right? I can't recover
mm,
like them, right? So it's
mm,
almost like you have to know that you have to start gradually and start to understand your body better, right? In
mm,
doing so, you will be able to, number one, make the most gains off of the least amount of effort. A
mm,
lot of people come into everything and like, oh, I got to go super hard and sprint to the beginning. My thing is like, no, dude, when you walk into something new, walk into it. Walk into it for as long as you possibly can. And then when it becomes too easy, then you change the modality. So that like that'd be the number one way to avoid injuries, avoid getting
mm.
hurt, and
Okay.
just like keep everything else at bay. And number one, keep making the most gains. Right?
Mm,
Like if you start off with like hanging 20 pounds like immediately, okay, where do you go from there? Like hanging 50 pounds for like an hour? Like that's probably going to lead to injury. Like the whole thing is you want to ride that fatigue for as long as possible, but you want to do it in a way that's also as safe as possible too, right? So
mm,
I guess the biggest thing that I would just say is like, yo, number one, start off gradually. Start off gradually, take your time. Number two, what is your why? Why are you doing this? If you don't know
mm,
your why, it doesn't matter. There's a great book. It's called Start With Why. And he talks about how this concept basically carries over into like every aspect of life. Like if you don't know your why, then why the fuck are you doing it, my guy? It's like if you have no idea, you're just kind of going through the motion. You're like, oh, I'm kind of doing it because of X, Y, Z. It sounds like a good idea. It's like you probably won't succeed and you will probably fail. And then you're going to say that PE doesn't work, which I've heard
Yeah,
over and over and
that
over again, right?
it
But I'm
happens a
like,
lot.
you got to know what lights your ass up. Like, what is it that's
Mm.
getting you, riled up or wanting to do this? If you
Mm.
don't know
And
your why, then you're not going to go anywhere.
yeah, that's true. And mate, when it comes to devices, are there any specific mistakes you've encountered that you can advise our people to avoid? Like, for example, when it comes to using well, you mentioned hanging too much too soon, but for
Yeah.
example, when it comes to pumping or all these stretchers, like, I don't know, maybe using an all these stretcher while sleeping. I don't know. What are
Yeah. Things
the
to
mistakes you've
avoid.
encountered?
I honestly think that for the most part, all the PE equipment that I've seen is relatively safe. And I remember I talked to Dr. Brent Dice about all the different equipment that exists out there. And, we were discussing this and he's like, it's pretty much all safe. The problem is that people take it to the extremes. So if you use a cock ring for like 36 hours a day and it atrophies and then you show up at his office and he's like, he's going to look at you like, why did you do this? And the guy's like, well, I don't know. I was on drugs and I put this cock ring and I didn't realize it was on. I also took Viagra and now my dick doesn't work properly. And these are the horror stories that he as a urologist has told me, and amongst other things like off air where I was like, oh my God, why would anybody do that? Guys injecting stuff into their dick. Like when it comes down to it, you just have to, I mean, if you look at some of the safety requirements that they are that go onto the labels of different like products, it says stupid shit like, please do not put up your ass. Please do not consume. Like it's a TV screen. Why would anybody put a TV screen up their ass? Right? Like it's got all kinds of weird things like that because people are so stupid. So to me, when it comes down to equipment, my biggest thing is just use it appropriately, use it in a way that makes sense, and always err on the side of caution. Like I can't say that enough because I'm like, it doesn't matter whether you're clamping, it doesn't matter whether you're pumping, you can always do damage with any of these devices. Any of these devices will destroy you. Even taking excessive supplements are not going to be good for you, right? But more than anything, it just kind of always err on the side of caution and take your time. Like I said, be gradual with it. It is not a rush. There is no need to rush into any of these different equipment and any type of modality that exists. Like try it out, give yourself enough time to actually adapt to it. And then when the time is right, then progress to the next level. But don't just step into it like, oh, you know what? This sounds like a great idea. I'm going to use I don't know, like a penis pump for the next 2 hours straight. Like that's a horrible idea, right? But it's like I read it on a forum somewhere. It's like, God, like there has to be a degree of common sense. So that's kind of
Yeah,
where I stand with like a lot of the different I guess equipment that exists. A lot of it's great, but in the wrong hands, it's like, oh God, some people are just
yeah.
stupid.
And
So
in the
yeah,
wrong place or the wrong source of information. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, it's quite tricky.
yeah. I mean, I I'm of the belief that again, if you get the coach, if you get the proper guidance, if you get an app, if you do something with people that you trust who are kind of like, hey, these people I can trust, the guys from Gel to Grow. Maybe I'll reach out and send a DM, right? Or even guys that DM me and stuff like ask me like, hey, would you recommend I use like one of the things I was talking with this gentleman was about using a sleeve all day. I'm like, do you feel that it's comfortable? And he's like, well, you know what? The sleeve that I got, it's very loose fitting, but enough to kind of keep me stretched out. And he's like, and it doesn't feel like it's tugging on me all day. I'm like, well, try it out for a day, see how it goes, right? And he's like, no, I worked with it. It was awesome. He's like, it felt a lot more comfortable than the all day stretcher. He's like, I didn't have to take it off to pee. I just had to roll it back. And he's like, I'm going to keep rocking with it. I'm like, well, then I think it's great. Like, it's a great way to go about it. Right. And, he's still using it to this day. And he's like, yeah, man. He's like, I've made length gains. I feel awesome. And I found that the most important thing was that I just felt really comfortable using it. Right. Whereas the ADS, like he told me, was like, I was starting to get uncomfortable. Like he was using the Falcon Forte and he said that he'd have to lube up the head and stuff sometimes. So, again, it's always one of those things where experiment, but like be smart, have a journal, go about it in a way that actually makes sense. Like that's the thing I can't get over enough, because honestly, when it comes to PE, it's just one of those things that, number one, you're playing with the favorite part of your body. You don't want to mess it up. And number two, you don't want to rush anything, man. You want to take your time with it. Like, I don't step into the gym and be like, I'm going to grow my biceps by half an inch tomorrow. It's not going to happen. I got to
Yeah.
give myself the right amount of time, and the thing is too, you got to feed the mind before you feed anything else. So again, that's kind of where I stand on that. And I'm very much just like, we have to approach it from a way of safety. We have to approach it from like, hey, if there's guys that are pretty smart, and that's the thing too, like on Reddit or on different forums, a lot of the guys, when you put these questions out there, if you are somebody new to this, if you have a question, ask the question. Even if it sounds stupid, ask the
Yeah.
question. And if somebody
That's
redirects you
great
to the
advice.
frequently asked questions side, like just go there and read up on it. You'll find a lot of the answers that you're looking for. A lot of them are already there. However, if you're unsure, then send a guy a DM. Like a guy like me, I don't mind. Like I tell everybody in the podcast episodes, if you have a question, send me a DM, right? And that's where
Yeah.
guys reach out and they're like, hey, man, I got a question about XYZ. Or, hey, did you ever try this pump? I'm like, oh, no, I didn't. But let me check it out with the LA pump. I'm like, oh, that's similar. He's like, would you recommend I get this cylinder? I'm like, and I pulled up the cylinder. Like, dude, you know how many times I pulled up the cylinder size chart to show guys? I'm like, listen, bud, you're like me. You need the 2. He's like, but I really want the 2.5. I'm like, you don't need the 2.5, dog. I'm like, trust me, man. And then he went out and got it, and he's like, yeah, you're right. This is right fit. So it's one of those things that it's like, if you can reach out to somebody that's done a little bit more, and for the most part, the guys in this community are very helpful. So
Yeah.
I find, again, like, just reach out, ask for help. Like, don't be afraid to. You're not going to lose anything. You're only going to win big time. So
Well, that's certainly great advice, mate. You've shared so much. I mean, those are great big truths everyone has to keep in mind. I mean, like you said, this journey is quite challenging when there's so much information, when you need to, when there's so much to try, and when it's so
mhm.
personal at the same time. So, Conrad, brother, I appreciate you being here today and sharing all your knowledge, your experience. It could be great, actually, to have you another time
Of course.
and discuss, well, other training methods, other
Mhm.
techniques. Um, but for today, I'll thank you, brother, for coming here,
Mhm.
and it was a pleasure, like always.
100%, man. I had an absolute blast, and I can't wait to do it again, brother.
It could be great.
Yeah, 100%.
So till next time.
I'll see you then.